This woman, rushing to a parent-teacher meeting, put on lipstick in front of a luxury car. The CEO inside slowly lowered the car window. She started to greet him, but the movement nearly made her fall. The CEO instinctively reached out to steady her, but it was no use. She landed on the ground with a thud. The CEO hurried out of the car and said, "You again?" He didn't wait for a reply, instead pulling out his phone and asking for her number. Why did the CEO gesture towards his expensive car? She understood as soon as she saw it. Every time she met him, nothing good ever happened. Yesterday, Silei's daughter celebrated her birthday at her kindergarten. They were choosing a gift at a toy store when, just after paying and preparing to leave, a little boy called out to them. He said the brooch Silei was wearing belonged to him. At that moment, the boy's father, Hao Jun, approached. Hearing his son say that his teacher had picked up his lost brooch, Hao Jun looked at the brooch on Silei. It was indeed the one he had put on his son that morning. He didn't hesitate, asking to review the surveillance camera to save time for both of them, as he had to organize his son's birthday party later. But Silei didn't agree, because it was also her daughter's birthday. Hao Jun insisted on keeping her from leaving. Just then, a voice rang out asking who had lost something. Hao Jun went to check, and sure enough, there were two identical brooches. He hurried after them, but they were already gone. After returning home, Hao Jun asked his assistant to investigate the mother and daughter, finding the whole incident bizarre. Every year on his son, Xing Chen's birthday, the boy would ask for his mother and want her to celebrate with him. Hao Jun didn't know how to respond. The image of the woman with the identical brooch stuck in his mind. Just then, his grandfather arrived with a birthday gift. Seeing Xing Chen wasn't present, he couldn't help but scold Hao Jun for not going on blind dates to find a mother for Xing Chen. Hao Jun retorted that no woman could meet his standards. His grandfather asked what kind of woman he wanted. If he dared to say it, his grandfather dared to find her. Hao Jun listed outlandish criteria: no education, no background, already married, and with a child. The next day, following Hao Jun's demands, his grandfather went looking for someone for his grandson to marry. He ended up being confronted by three elderly ladies who accused him of causing trouble and told him to leave. He almost fell, but Silei caught him just in time. Silei asked what happened, and one of the ladies showed her the dating profile. She looked at the information: a 28-year-old man with a son, 1.84 meters tall, and a postgraduate student. Not only did he have an annual income in the hundreds of millions, but he also owned a house and a car. Excellent conditions. The lady told her to keep reading. Silei saw his requirements: no education, no background. He'd also been married before, preferably with a child. After reading it, Silei was stunned. But she explained on the old man's behalf, saying everyone has their own circumstances. After this explanation, the three ladies' attitudes softened considerably. They even felt that Silei was quite outstanding, and began vying to introduce their own sons to her. Silei exclaimed that she already had a child, effectively extinguishing their enthusiasm. Hearing this, Hao Jun's grandfather realized she perfectly matched his grandson's criteria. He became curious and inquired further, discovering Silei was a single mother. He decided he had to introduce her to his grandson. Just then, Silei received a call from her boss, asking her to drop the Mao Lin company order. Hao Jun's grandfather overheard this, and was overjoyed. Mao Lin was his grandson's company. He immediately pulled a pen and paper from his pocket, wrote down an address and phone number, and told Silei to go there tomorrow, to meet someone named He Qing. Finally, his grandson's marriage problem had a solution. He hurried off to share the good news, and prepare for the company's upcoming anniversary celebration, where the two could meet. After the grandfather left, Hao Jun's assistant arrived with news. It turned out two identical brooches had indeed been made, the design inspired by the Greek myth of the Gemini twins, meant as a blessing for newborns. Unexpectedly, there really were two. At the company's anniversary celebration, Silei arrived with her daughter, and the assistant rushed to greet them. He then informed Hao Jun that the person his grandfather had recommended was here. At that moment, Hao Jun's phone rang. He excused himself from a client and found a quiet place to answer the call. Luo Qi, who had always liked Hao Jun, wanted to size up this important client, and even mistook Silei for a waitress, accidentally spilling her wine on Silei. Seeing this, He Qing quickly ushered Silei to a restroom to tidy up, explaining that she needed to make a good impression, as she would be meeting Mao Lin's CEO shortly. While Silei was tidying her clothes, the restroom door suddenly swung open, causing her to instinctively raise her hands in defense. In the ensuing chaos, both she and the person who opened the door fell onto a couch. Only then did they recognize each other. They both looked so confused. At that moment, the commotion caused the assistant to open the door, but he quickly retreated. Sile then realized the person she was about to meet was the very partner she needed to contact. She immediately tried to discuss business, but Haojun flatly refused, assuming Sile had deliberately used underhanded tactics to get to him. Undeterred, Sile followed him back to the party. This partnership was crucial for her, tied to her daughter, Zixuan's, tuition for the next semester. But Haojun was too busy. She knew this time it was probably hopeless. Remembering the previous day at the kindergarten's family activity, Sile recalled Haojun being impressed by the paintings she and her daughter had created. They'd even discussed finding time to talk privately. Haojun had declined, saying today wasn't suitable, and suggested another time. Sile had found him quite agreeable then, but today, things were different. Suddenly, she saw a serving cart rolling straight towards Xingchen. She reacted instantly, pulling him out of harm's way, and checked to make sure he was all right. Xingchen, seeing Sile had saved him, immediately declared her his mother. Hearing this, Haojun rushed over. Luo Qi seized the opportunity to accuse Sile of showing off in front of Haojun and feigning concern for Xingchen. A waiter quickly spoke up for Sile, explaining the situation. After the incident, Haojun's perspective on Sile shifted, and he finally agreed to discuss business. Just then, his grandfather appeared. It turned out Sile was the very person his grandfather had recommended. Wanting to further their connection, he insisted Haojun drive Sile and Zixuan home. As they got out of the car, worried Zixuan might be cold, Haojun took off his coat and draped it over her. Sile was still thinking about the business deal, but Haojun dismissed it, saying it was too late to talk business. Back at home, he told his grandfather he wanted to invite Sile for dinner. His grandfather was even more enthusiastic, immediately calling Sile and inviting her for dinner the next day, not giving her a chance to refuse. He even planned to personally go grocery shopping. Hearing this, Xingchen's internal alarm bells went off. They were serious about finding him a stepmother. Xingchen was firmly on Luo Qi's side. Whenever his grandfather found his father a girlfriend, they'd team up to drive her away. With Luo Qi's help, Xingchen felt confident. But the next day, he saw his mother and realized she was the honored guest. Xingchen knew he'd made a mistake. When Luo Qi walked in and recognized Sile, she immediately adopted a hostess-like demeanor, demanding to know why Sile was there. Sile quickly explained she was there to discuss business. Luo Qi then noticed Haojun's jacket. She questioned why Sile had it. Just then, Haojun appeared and explained that Sile was his blind date. Luo Qi was incredulous, declaring Sile wasn't his type. To deter her, during dinner preparations, Haojun deliberately called Sile over to help him tie his apron. Luo Qi angrily turned and left. Xingchen quickly assisted his father by calling Sile Mom in front of everyone. The word Mom stunned everyone present. While serving Xingchen some food, Sile gently told him that although she liked him very much, she wasn't his mother. She was Zixuan's mother. The two children began arguing over who Sile's real child was, both eventually bursting into tears. The meal ended in a chorus of sobs. Dinner over, it was time to discuss the partnership. They walked to a garden where Sile broached the topic. Haojun immediately responded with, "Let's get married." Sile couldn't believe her ears and asked him to repeat himself. Haojun reiterated his proposal. Xingchen needed a mother, and Zixuan needed a father. Together, they could form a complete family. Sile refused. While she appreciated his sentiment, they couldn't just get married on a whim. Haojun persisted, appealing to Sile's financial concerns. He could provide Zixuan with a top-tier education. This angered Sile, and she squirted him with a water gun. Haojun chased after her, explaining that he truly wanted her. His grandfather, watching from the doorway, fainted from exasperation. He scolded Haojun for upsetting Sile. Only when Haojun revealed he had just proposed did his grandfather calm down. Sile tried to explain, but Haojun nudged her foot, took her hand, and promised his grandfather they would marry soon. This delighted his grandfather. As they left, Sile reminded them not to deceive the elderly. Haojun insisted he was serious, but Sile dismissed it as a joke. Later, Haojun called his best friend. who scolded him for essentially looking for a mother for his son, not a wife for himself. Luckily, his friend, experienced in romance, advised him to send flowers. Despite finding it cliché, Hao-jun researched the meaning of different flowers online. Just then, he received a call from his assistant. DNA testing had confirmed Zixuan was a song, his family name. It turned out that the night he drove them home, Hao-jun had put his jacket on Zixuan and taken a strand of her hair for testing. Unexpectedly, the results confirmed she was a song, while Xing Chen had been pursuing Xili to be his mother all along. So, the next day, when picking up Xing Chen from kindergarten, he presented Xile with a large bouquet of roses, secretly delighted by her expression. But the next second, Xile sneezed loudly after receiving the flowers. Hao-jun, oblivious, assumed she had a cold. Only when she explained her pollen allergy did he realize his mistake and quickly stashed the flowers in his car trunk. Seeing Xile's allergic reaction, Hao-jun insisted on taking her to the hospital. The doctor scolded him for not knowing about his girlfriend's pollen allergy. Hao-jun accepted the reprimand silently. Xile's reaction was severe, requiring ointment. Just then, the director called the doctor away, asking Hao-jun to apply the ointment. Xile quickly refused, but she couldn't reach her back. Hao-jun offered to apply it through the curtain. Reluctantly, she agreed. And so, Hao-jun applied the ointment, his heart fluttering with a strange joy. He promised Xile it wouldn't happen again. Xile seized the opportunity to pitch her project. Back home, he reviewed her proposal thoroughly. It was excellent, but her company lacked the resources to execute it. After some thought, he messaged Xile, praising her report and inviting her to the office the next day to discuss it further. Xile was thrilled. Zixuan's tuition was no longer a worry. Amidst her happiness, her best friend delivered bad news, begging Xile to take her place on a blind date the next day, claiming Xile was better at handling such situations. The following day, Xile presented herself as a food enthusiast, hoping to deter her date. He remained unfazed, and the date proceeded as planned. They discovered they were from the same hometown, hitting it off. That's when Hao-jun, there to meet a client, spotted them. He eavesdropped on their conversation. Upon learning Xile was on a blind date, he couldn't contain himself and asked her why she wasn't picking up her daughter from kindergarten. Her date inquired about Hao-jun's identity. Hao-jun promptly introduced himself as Xile's husband, and without waiting for a response, pulled her out of the restaurant. Hao-jun wanted to make it up to her with a meal, but Xile declined. However, moments later, they were at the kindergarten. Xing Chen and Zixuan were having a quarrel. Zixuan had noticed Xing Chen's sadness and asked what was wrong. He was upset about not having a mother. Zixuan consoled him, saying she didn't have a father. Xing Chen offered Zixuan his father if she gave him her mother. Zixuan burst into tears. Learning of this, Hao-jun demanded Xing Chen apologize. But Xing Chen only wanted a mother, not a father. Hao-jun was at a loss. Seeing this, Xile called Xing Chen over for a hug. Xing Chen called her Mom and embraced her. He finally had a mother. Xile promised he could call her Mom whenever he missed having one. Xing Chen was overjoyed. Xile's actions further solidified Hao-jun's feelings for her. He then took Xile to his company to discuss her project. Luo Qi witnessed this. Needing to sign a contract, Hao-jun assigned Xile to his assistant, instructing him to explain everything clearly. But as the assistant delivered the decision to terminate the partnership, he received a phone call. The cancellation devastated Xile, sending her to the restroom to compose herself. Luo Qi appeared, adding insult to injury. Leaving the company, Xile's anger grew. With the partnership gone, what would happen to Zixuan? Despite intending to leave, she returned, confronting Hao-jun in the meeting room. Hao-jun was bewildered. Xile threw her proposal on the table and stormed out. The assistant arrived at that moment. He hadn't had a chance to give her the personal contract yet. Just as Hao-jun's anger flared, Luo Qi appeared. The reason for Xile's outburst became clear. Luo Qi was behind it all. Luo Qi had discovered Xile was working on a proposal for Hao-jun's company and was scheduled to sign a contract the next day. She deliberately rescheduled the contract renewal signing with Hao-jun's company to the same day, hoping Xile would see it and misunderstand. Everything went according to her plan. Hao-jun wanted to explain, but an important shareholder meeting prevented him, leaving the misunderstanding unresolved. Xile couldn't wait. She had to find a new partner quickly. This new potential partner, Mr. Zhu wasn't a decent man. He insisted on drinking during their business discussion, implying a lack of sincerity if she didn't drink enough. For Zixuan's tuition, Lei forced herself to drink until she couldn't take it anymore, ending up vomiting in the restroom, ignoring her ringing phone. A waiter answered, and Hao Jun, learning she was at the Kunshan Hotel, rushed over. Mr. Zhu, no longer restraining himself, made unwanted advances towards Lei. Just then, Hao Jun arrived and pulled her away. Lei felt no gratitude, believing her life had gone downhill since meeting him. She didn't realize how much her words hurt. Hao Yun. He declared he wouldn't bother her again, and then presented her with a personal contract he had prepared. Because her company was facing bankruptcy and couldn't execute the plan, he wanted to contract with her directly. Lei didn't believe him. At that moment, her phone rang. Her colleague informed her that their boss had run off without paying salaries. Lei rushed to the company, finding it in chaos, deserted. Crying, she gathered her belongings and then apologized to Hao Jun for doubting him. As Lei prepared to take Zixuan to school, her daughter suddenly collapsed, causing Lei immense panic. After examination, the doctor revealed Zixuan's condition had worsened, requiring immediate surgery. Due to her young age, the success rate wasn't high. Ideally, Dr. Mu, the head of neurosurgery, should perform the operation, but his schedule was full for 6 months. Hao Jun arrived, asking what was wrong. Lei, tears streaming down her face, explained Zixuan's brain tumor, blaming herself for delaying the surgery. She would gladly give her life for her daughters. Hao Jun, heartbroken, comforted her, promising Zixuan would be okay because she was a song. Lei couldn't afford the hospital fees, having exhausted all other borrowing options. Left with only loan sharks, Hao Jun grabbed her phone and the hospital bill, paying it without hesitation. Lei insisted she would repay him. Hao Jun told her not to worry, considering it an advance payment for her project. He then took Lei to see his grandfather. Upon learning of Zixuan's condition, his grandfather offered his own pre-scheduled surgery slot to Zixuan. Lei couldn't accept it. His grandfather explained that surgery or conservative treatment were equally viable for him, and his decision was completely voluntary. Persuaded, Lei agreed, but later, she felt uneasy. Hao Jun reassured her that his grandfather's decision was final, and he would reschedule his grandfather's surgery, urging her not to worry. At this point, there was nothing else to be done. Seeing Hao Jun's care for Zixuan, Lei made up her mind. They were destined to be a family, so why wait? She decided to marry Hao Jun, calling him downstairs to ask if he would accept Zixuan, even with her illness. Hao Jun readily agreed. If he accepted Zixuan, she would accept being Xingchen's mother, his grandfather's granddaughter-in-law, and Hao Jun's wife. Hao Jun, having longed to hear these words, embraced her tightly. They registered their marriage soon after. Hao Jun's grandfather was deeply moved, finally witnessing his grandson's marriage. Zixuan had a father, and Xingchen had a mother. Lei brought Zixuan to Hao Jun's house. Looking at the grand residence, Lei still couldn't believe she was married, but she knew it was the right decision. Zixuan, delighted with her beautiful new room, thanked her. Uncle. Hao Jun's grandfather arrived, directing them to see their wedding room. Surprised by his grandfather's romantic gesture, Lei felt incredibly awkward. She'd forgotten about the consummation aspect of marriage during registration. Regretting her oversight, she decided to play it by ear. His grandfather quickly excused himself, leaving them alone. Now alone, Lei, unsure what to do, picked up a newspaper to ease the tension. Seeing the headline, she froze, hiding it behind her back. Noticing Hao Jun approaching while taking off his shirt, she nervously handed him his pajamas. Sensing her anxiety, Hao Jun excused himself, claiming he had work to do. Lei immediately searched online for what to do when your husband wants a second child. Dismissing that idea, she considered sleeping with Zixuan to avoid the wedding night. However, both children rejected her, kicking her out of their rooms. Left with no other option, she showered and pretended to sleep while Hao Jun was away. Hao Jun, having lied about work, was in his study reading how to play the role of a husband. How could he deceive his grandfather and Zixuan? The more he thought, the more confused he became. He decided to shower first. Hao Jun opened the bathroom door, only to find Lei inside. Before he could react, a towel flew at his face. In the commotion, he accidentally flipped the light switch. illuminating them in a compromising position. As Hao Jun tried to leave, Sila mistook his intention. After all, they were together for the children, but his grandfather didn't know that. To maintain the status, Hao Jun needed Sila's full cooperation in fulfilling her wifely duties. They began to practice. Hao Jun, taking her hand, stroking her hair, and finally pulling her into an embrace, startled Sila. She instinctively pulled away, almost falling. But Hao Jun caught her. They were now in a very intimate position. Her heart pounding, Sila asked him to let go. Instead, Hao Jun leaned on her hair. Sila cried out in pain. Hearing the noise, Hao Jun's grandfather, passing by on the stairs, eavesdropped at the door. Satisfied, he walked away. After the commotion, Hao Jun became more compliant. The next morning, they continued their loving couple act for his grandfather. Hao Jun served Sila food with his chopsticks, and even wiped her mouth after she finished eating. Sila was touched. Most importantly, he knew Zixuan couldn't eat greasy food, and served her vegetables. Hao Jun's grandfather beamed at their affectionate display. Sila recounted the events to her best friend, Lei Xin, expressing her positive feelings for Hao Jun and her decision to marry him. Lei Xin disagreed, angrily analyzing the situation and insisting on meeting Hao Jun to assess him herself. Hao Jun, also present, overheard and decided to tag along. He had his own motives, harboring a crush on Lei Xin. Lei Xin was surprised to see him there. Gathering her courage, Lei Xin asked Hao Jun why he married Sila. Hao Jun hesitated before answering that Sila always faced everything alone, and he wanted to be her support. Sila was touched by his understanding. Lei Xin was satisfied with his answer, but Hao Jun remained skeptical, believing Hao Jun was putting on an act because they knew each other too well. Unaware of the truth, Sila believed she would build a good life with Hao Jun, reciprocating his feelings. That night, she peeked through the doorway, watching Hao Jun play happily with Zixuan. Zixuan had adorned him with hair clips and lipstick. Determined, Sila rushed to the kitchen, asking the housekeeper about Hao Jun's hobbies. The housekeeper mentioned that besides work, Hao Jun spent his time with his son and grandfather, adding he had a billiards room in the basement. Sila went to the basement, picking up a cue and practicing. She wanted to play with Hao Jun, but he didn't seem interested. He meticulously wiped the cue she had used, telling her to stay away from the billiards room. Sila simply wanted to understand him better, but Hao Jun insisted she didn't need to. Sila found him strange. Yesterday, he'd made heartfelt promises in front of her friend, but overnight, he'd changed completely. Sila realized he had been acting. From now on, they would stay out of each other's lives, romantically, professionally, and personally. This heartbreaking scene was witnessed by Xing Shen. He ran upstairs, urging his father to apologize and comfort Sila. Hao Jun dismissed him, saying it was adult business. Xing Shen thought his father was a bad person. Hao Jun's primary motivation for marrying Sila was Zixuan. He wanted custody. The billiards incident created tension. The next day, Sila took Xing Chen and Zixuan to a street market. Zixuan got thirsty. After she finished her drink, Sila turned to find Xing Chen missing. Panicked, she carried Zixuan while searching frantically, asking passers-by, but to no avail. She called Hao Jun. Just as she hung up, she spotted Xing Chen. A man had found him and brought him back. That night, Sila apologized to Hao Jun, promising not to take the children to the market again. Hao Jun wasn't concerned about the market's safety, but felt teaching the children to sell things there was unnecessary. Sila, angered, refused to speak to him, opting to sleep on the sofa. Hao Jun, checking on Zixuan, learned that Xing Chen had broken a toy that Sila intended to fix. Xing Chen refused the repair, expecting his father and great-grandfather to buy him a new one. Sila had taken them to the market to teach Xing Chen the value of money and the importance of taking care of his belongings. This had caused a huge misunderstanding. The next day at work, Hao Jun was distracted. Sila clearly cared for the family and Xing Chen. He wanted to apologize, but Sila reminded him of their agreement not to interfere in each other's lives. Unable to voice his feelings, he decided to show them through actions. With the company seminar approaching, Hao Jun, seeing Sila still asleep, deliberately slammed a box on the table to wake her. He instructed her to change clothes and try on the shoes downstairs. Sila opened the box to reveal a beautiful dress, perfectly her size. She was surprised by his thoughtfulness. In the elevator, Hao Jun extended his arm. As husband and wife, Si-lei reluctantly took it. Luckily, they were prepared, or Luo Qi, standing outside the elevator, would have discovered their act. Seeing them together, Luo Qi couldn't resist questioning Si-lei's presence. Hao Jun explained they were attending the seminar and started to close the elevator doors. But Luo Qi blocked them. She accused Si-lei of being clingy, ingratiating herself with Xing Chen and Hao Jun's grandfather. She pointed out that Hao Jun had canceled their contract, yet Si-lei still had the audacity to show up. Unwilling to explain to such a malicious person, Si-lei grabbed Hao Jun's tie and kissed him in front of Luo Qi. This was the most direct way to respond. Luo Qi, stunned, backed away until the doors finally closed. Si-lei, surprised by her own actions, released Hao Jun. At the seminar, Hao Jun introduced Si-lei as his wife and the keynote speaker. Si-lei was taken aback, unsure which Hao Jun was real. Her assistant nudged her repeatedly. Checking her phone, she saw her lipstick smudged from the elevator kiss and hurried to the restroom to fix her makeup. Luo Qi seized the moment, asking if Si-lei enjoyed acting with Hao Jun. She had investigated Si-lei, disbelieving their marriage, and suspecting Si-lei was a nanny mother figure for Xing Chen. She was quickly proven wrong. After the seminar, the staff presented Si-lei with flowers. Hao Jun rushed over, taking the bouquet and giving it to Luo Qi, explaining Si-lei's allergy. Luo Qi watched as Hao Jun then presented Si-lei with dried flowers, thanking her for her recent efforts. Si-lei was surprised he remembered her allergy. Furious, Luo Qi thrust the bouquet into the assistant's hands and stormed off. Back home, Si-lei wished it were all real. She knew it was just an act for public appearances. But that evening, she saw Hao Jun's genuine care for Zixuan, treating her like his own daughter. She couldn't decipher his true nature. Soon after, her mother called, having learned about the marriage and insisting on visiting. Si-lei worried their charade would be exposed, but Hao Jun assured her he knew how to play the part of a good husband. The next day, at the family meeting, Hao Jun presented Si-lei's father with tea, and knowing her mother was a teacher, he gifted her a fountain pen. Impressed by this handsome and thoughtful son-in-law, Si-lei's mother was finally at ease. Just then, Xing Chen ran from the room and stood beside Si-lei. Her parents' expressions immediately changed. Hao Jun introduced Xing Chen as his son. Si-lei's father, furious, slammed his glass on the table, rejecting the marriage. He believed Hao Jun, divorced with a child, wasn't good enough for his daughter. Despite Si-lei's insistence that she didn't mind, her father felt responsible for her happiness. He feared the child's mother would return, leaving Si-lei being put to a side. Xing Chen declared his mother had returned, then ran to Si-lei's parents, calling them Grandpa and Grandma, and describing himself as a smart and obedient child. Si-lei's mother, charmed by Xing Chen's politeness, took an instant liking to him. Hao Jun reassured them it wouldn't happen, promising to fulfill his husbandly duties and care for Si-lei and Zixuan. Her parents agreed on the condition of a wedding. That night, Si-lei's father, fond of drinking, got Hao Jun drunk. Si-lei struggled to help him to his room. Drunk, he finally apologized, easing Si-lei's heart. He confessed his desire to be with her forever. This time, Si-lei believed him, trusting the adage, "In wine there is the truth." Si-lei's wedding day arrived. Before leaving home, she toasted her parents. Her father placed her hand in Hao Jun's. Leaving the Qi family home, Si-lei officially became a song. But before that, they had to cross a bumpy path, symbolizing a smooth future. The stones were painful. Halfway through, Si-lei stumbled, but Hao Jun caught her. Si-lei suggested he carry her the rest of the way. The ceremony began. They held their vows. "I Si-lei Qi, take you, Song Hao Jun, to be my husband, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do us part." It was Hao Jun's turn, but he stopped halfway, recalling Hao Jun's words. "You married her for another reason." He couldn't continue, instead promising to love and cherish Si-lei forever. The guests were moved, applauding warmly. During the ring exchange, Si-lei was surprised and touched to see Hao Jun had incorporated her designs into the rings, realizing his care for her. That evening, concerned Hao Jun hadn't eaten enough, Si-lei made him noodles, happily bringing them to him, only to overhear his conversation with Hao Jun. Hao Jun admitted their marriage, and his feelings were fake. Heartbroken, Si-lei didn't confront him, instead crying while eating the noodles outside. The next morning, bidding her parents farewell, she forced a smile, hiding her pain. Back home, the pretense dropped, and she distanced herself from Hao Jun. He noticed the change, asking what was wrong, but Sile ignored him. Despite her anger, she maintained the charade for his grandfather, fearing he couldn't handle the truth. Zixuan's surgery day arrived. They went for pre-op tests. Back home, Sile encouraged Zixuan to eat nutritious food, anxious about the next day. Seeing her worry, Hao Jun hugged her from behind, hoping to comfort her. Sile asked what he was doing. He lied, saying his grandfather was watching. Sile believed him. He actually had something else to tell her. Due to company issues, he had to travel on Zixuan's surgery day. But Zixuan was expecting him, and wouldn't proceed without him. The doctor asked Sile to sign the surgery consent form, warning her of potential complications, like cerebral hemorrhage and nerve damage leading to paralysis. Sile's hand trembled as she held the pen. Just then, Hao Jun arrived and signed the form. He had prioritized Zixuan's surgery over work. Zixuan, overjoyed to see him, agreed to the procedure. Before entering the operating room, she held Hao Jun's hand, asking him and Sile to wait for her. He reassured her they would. The surgery was a success. 3 months later, they attended a parent-teacher meeting together. Hao Jun smiled, watching Sile interact playfully with the children. He received a call from lawyer Wang, inquiring about the marriage. Looking at Sile, his affection for the children evident, Hao Jun told lawyer Wang to stop everything, instructing him to keep it confidential. Zixuan's custody no longer mattered to him. With Zixuan fully recovered, Sile felt a weight lifted. It was time to pursue her own ambitions. She consulted the children, who supported her, eager for her to earn money to buy them transforming robots. That evening, Sile prepared her resume, applying for jewelry design positions at numerous companies, but received no responses. Lowering her expectations, she applied for sales positions, but still no luck. Seeing her job search, Hao Jun had his assistant call her with a job offer as planning manager at Mao Lin, but Sile declined, wanting to apply for a sales position at a jewelry store herself. Unbeknownst to her, the store was also owned by Mao Lin. Hao Jun, learning this, instructed his assistant to ensure his wife was taken care of. Sile returned home empty-handed, unaware of Hao Jun's instructions. No one dared hire his wife, greeting her respectfully instead. Persistent, Sile finally secured a sales job at Fan Yi Jewelry. Starting the next day, the assistant informed Hao Jun. Hao Jun immediately left work to dissuade Sile from working at Fan Yi. He recalled his assistant's words. Fan Yi is the last jewelry store Madam interviewed at in this mall. If you tell her it's Luo Qi's store, she'll go to another mall, creating more distance between you. So he didn't reveal the truth, offering to find her another job. Sile refused. Unable to persuade her, he instructed his assistant to keep an eye on her, ensuring she wasn't mistreated by customers. On her first day, Sile encountered a difficult customer. Unsatisfied with the numerous pieces presented, the customer noticed Sile's brooch. Learning it wasn't for sale, she became insistent. The store manager intervened. Undeterred, the customer demanded to see the brooch. Impressed, she deemed Sile an expert, and with Sile's guidance, purchased a large diamond ring. At first, Luo Qi looked down on Sile, but now she saw Sile actually knew her stuff about jewelry. But she steered the customer towards the least popular diamond ring, showing she was still green. Luo Qi's boss decided to teach Sile a lesson, making her responsible for the sale, and hinting there would be trouble if anything went wrong. Stressed, Sile went to Hao Jun, finally getting why he'd warned her about working at Fan Yi. They cleared up their misunderstanding. Qin Tian, who had a crush on Sile, saw them talking outside the mall and figured they were a couple. To nail the big sale, Sile wanted to go to Master Long's exhibition, but she couldn't get a ticket. Seeing her upset, Hao Jun quickly called and got one. He gave it to Sile, hoping she'd thank him. After an hour of nothing, just as he was getting bummed, Sile rushed in, thanked him profusely, and turned to leave. Hao Jun stopped her, saying he'd pick her up. Sile asked why he wasn't going with her. Unable to admit he only got one ticket, Hao Jun made up an excuse about being busy. On the day of the exhibition, he got there early and waited, only to see Sile show up with a good-looking guy who looked kind of familiar. Driving home, a jealous Hao Jun asked who the guy was. Sile said he was a friend, but when he asked what the guy did, she wasn't sure. just that he was really smart. Inside, as Sila tried to take a picture with Master Long's sculpture, Qin Tian photobombed her. Then, he introduced Sila to Master Long himself. Thanks to Qin Tian, Sila got to meet the famous artist, and even snag a picture with him. She showed the photo to Hao Jun, making him even more jealous. Clueless, Sila was thrilled and wanted to frame it. Hao Jun shot down the idea, making Sila realize he was jealous. But she thought, "That's weird, he doesn't like me. He just married me to be a mom for Xing Chen." She brushed it off. Hao Jun got Legend 28 gifts to tell her how he felt. This brought back bad memories for Li Xin. Her ex had pulled the same stunt before dumping her. She felt humiliated and chewed Hao Jun out. He was shocked. He poured his heart out, and that's how she reacted. He went to Sila to figure out what was going on. After she explained, Hao Jun knew what he needed to do. He wished he and Li Xin could be as happy as Sila and Hao Jun. Sila told him to cut the polite talk. She knew Hao Jun's feelings weren't real. Hao Jun asked if she was sure, pointing out they'd been married for over 3 months and still weren't sleeping together. Hao Jun couldn't take it anymore. He felt like he was going to lose it. So, in the middle of the night, he pretended to sleepwalk, his only way to move from the couch to the bed. He even put his hand on Sila. This woke her up. She stared at him, asking what he was doing. Hao Jun yawned and said nothing, then obediently returned to the couch. He knew this couldn't go on, so he ordered a book online. How to Understand Your Wife. He studied it in his spare time. When his assistant arrived with work updates, Hao Jun quickly hid the book and asked how Sila was doing at Fan Yi. The assistant reported she was doing well, but seemed distracted lately, like she was missing someone. Probably Hao Yun. Hao Jun couldn't hide his delight. Worried her feelings might affect her work, he decided to visit her. Sila was distracted because Hao Jun had told her about Hao Jun's conversation. While Hao Jun had indeed said those things, that was only half the story. He regretted his words and was now trying to make it up to her. Sila was confused, unsure which Hao Jun was real. Arriving at the store, Hao Jun saw Qin Tian helping Sila with a customer. Jealousy flared. Sila told Hao Jun she was working, and they could talk at lunch. After greeting Qin Tian to mark his territory, Hao Jun pulled Sila away before her shift ended. He questioned how she knew Qin Tian. Sila explained that Qin Tian had helped her find Xing Chen when he was lost. Qin Tian had been smitten with Sila since then, creating opportunities to see her, including the jewelry exhibition. Now, he was helping her close sales. Not to be outdone, Hao Jun declared he would shop there tomorrow and expected Sila to assist him. Sila refused. Immediately jealous, Hao Jun asked why Qin Tian could help her, but not him. This further angered Sila. She left without eating, telling him to pay his own bill. Back home, he couldn't understand the difference between himself and Qin Tian. Hao Jun shared his misery. After his failed confession, he'd been unable to eat or sleep, coming to Hao Jun to vent. Unexpectedly, Hao Jun was also struggling with relationship woes. Luckily, Hao Jun discovered Hao Jun's book, Learning Men Should Be Proactive, Creating Opportunities If None Existed. Hao Jun took this to heart. That evening, he replaced the sofa. Sila wondered where it had gone. He couldn't admit he'd replaced it, claiming it was broken. Sila worried about where he would sleep. He was a man of status. With a simple ploy, Hao Jun secured his place in the bed. He now picked Sila up from work every day. But to boost sales, she'd started working overtime, keeping Hao Jun waiting until after 9 p.m. Dealing with the kids, Zixuan and Xing Chen, clinging to him and asking for their mother, added to his frustration. He wondered if Qin Tian was helping Sila close sales during her overtime. Troubled, he called her. But it was only 8 p.m. Sila wouldn't be off for another hour. Annoyed, Zixuan spilled a carton of milk all over him, silencing both children in fear. He called Sila again, claiming the kids had spilled milk all over the sheets and asking what to do. Sila told him to ask the housekeeper. Left with no choice, Hao Jun said Zixuan was scared and couldn't sleep, then handed the phone to her. Hearing her daughter's voice, Sila rushed home. He had thoughtfully prepared milk for her. As they sat on the bed, Hao Jun was annoyed by the bouquet of flowers. He assumed Sila would put them aside, but she wore them around her neck. Hao Jun was completely deflated. They'd been married for over 3 months, and her husband had always been distant, not even sharing their bed. But today, he'd suddenly changed, kissing her in his office. Lei instinctively pushed him away. To her surprise, he kissed her again. Her eyes widened, but this time, she didn't resist. The romantic moment was interrupted by a knock. It was his assistant with work updates. Leaving the office, Lei calmed down and immediately sought her friend's analysis. Experienced in such matters, her friend explained that sometimes, even if a man isn't interested, things can happen in the heat of the moment. This reminded Lei of the incident at the store when her manager had rushed in, saying how June was in trouble, with construction workers demanding payment at the mall. She'd rushed over to explain. The workers wouldn't listen, and a flower pot flew towards them. How June shielded her, getting injured in the process. It turned out Qin Tian had orchestrated the whole thing. Seeing Lei cry, How June had kissed her. Now, she realized the intense atmosphere had likely prompted his unusual behavior. Her friend agreed How June might be developing feelings. Lei decided to test him. To bolster her courage, she drank a bottle of wine and unbuttoned her blouse, figuring this was the most direct approach. Hearing the door open, she stood up, ready to execute her plan, her head spinning from the alcohol. Seeing her drunk, How June tried to guide her to bed, but she pushed him onto the sofa, passing out herself. He tried to carry her to bed, but she clung to him. Suddenly so close, How June struggled to control himself. Just then, Lei confessed her feelings. How June replied that he liked her too, but she was too drunk to hear him. The next morning, remembering her actions, Lei was mortified. All day, she agonized, rehearsing her explanation to How June. But when he appeared, she was too nervous to remember anything. Seeing him staring, she blurted out, asking why he had married her in the first place. Although it had been a marriage of convenience, he couldn't tell her that, especially since his feelings had changed. Unable to lie, he avoided the question. Seeing his reaction, Lei felt rejected, convinced she was just seeing Chen's mother in his eyes. Dejected, she lost all motivation for work. Just then, the manager informed Lei that Miss Yu, the previous customer, was unhappy with the ring Lei had designed. Lei examined it, agreeing that some gemstones should have been set more simply, but Miss Yu insisted on alterations before payment. Luo Qi argued that each designer has their own style, making alterations disrespectful. Qin Tian, now the diamond department manager at Mao Lin, intervened, suggesting Lei modify the design herself. Lei accepted the challenge, especially since it was the last day of her probation. She promised to finish before closing. Luo Qi set a tight deadline of 10 p.m. How June, learning of this, arranged for Lei to use a vacant jewelry workshop at his company, instructing his assistant to keep it secret. He didn't want Lei to know he was helping her. Qin Tian had orchestrated this entire situation. Together, they altered the ring, finishing just before closing. Miss Yu was delighted and authorized payment. Lei officially became a Fan Yi employee. Luo Qi, disbelieving Lei's skill, called, assuming How June had paid for the alterations. Only when the manager confirmed did she believe it. After work, Qin Tian saw How June waiting outside. Smiling slyly, he returned to the store, intercepting Lei and asking her to dinner. How June waited in vain, fuming. As dawn approached, still no Lei, he called her. Learning she was having a late-night meal, he rushed over, only to find Qin Tian with her. He warned Qin Tian to stay away from Lei. Driving home, How June scolded her for being too friendly with Qin Tian. Seeing his jealousy, Lei voiced her confusion about his constant avoidance. She asked if he still missed Xing Chen's mother. How June denied it, telling her never to mention that woman again. Lei asked if he had any feelings for her. How June hesitated, afraid that revealing the truth would cause Lei to leave with Zixuan. He remained silent. But time was running out. Returning home, he discovered Lei's clothes were gone. He questioned the housekeeper, learning she had gone to visit relatives in Lishan, leaving with tear-swollen eyes and unreachable by phone. Panic-stricken, he rushed to find her. Fortunately, Lei found a traveling companion for the mountain journey. However, halfway up, the man's intentions turned sinister, grabbing her hand and refusing to let go. Lei told him to get off her, but he wouldn't. Luckily, How June showed up just in the nick of time. The guy ran off. How June was wiped out, his dress shoes totally wrong for hiking, his legs killing him. Lei told him to head back, but he refused. He said he'd never leave her again. But a second later, He was regretting it when they got to the glass bridge. Terrified of heights, his legs were shaking. Seeing how scared he was, Seeley told him to wait while she talked to her deceased sister. This time, Hao Jun pushed through, legs wobbly, and made his way to Seeley, where he told her he loved her. Seeley was so happy she couldn't even speak. They hugged. That night, they found a small hotel in the countryside. Seeley figured Hao Jun must be beat. Hao Jun, taking it the wrong way, said he was still good to go. He wasn't going to miss this chance. They'd been married forever, and now they were finally in sync. Just then, the owner knocked, telling them to move their stuff because the rain was flooding the rooms. Hao Jun got up and looked outside. Sure enough, water was pouring in, soaking everything, even his phone. The next day, they went to Seeley's parents' house. Her mom, seeing how messy they looked, told them to go take a shower. Even though they'd had a rough time, they were happy. But it didn't last. Qing Tian, still going after Hao Jun, hadn't quit. He got in touch with Shi Chen, Hao Jun's ex, and offered her a spokesperson gig at Mao Lin. Bringing his wife to her folks' place for the first time, Hao Jun grabbed Seeley as soon as they were alone and closed the curtains. He was just about to get started when Seeley said the other curtain was open. He ran to close it and jumped when Aunt Tu popped in, wanting him to chop peppers. The hot peppers made his eyes water. Men are all the same. No matter how fancy they are, they still gotta do chores at the in-laws. After a long day, he could finally get down to business. He quietly closed the bedroom door and took Seeley's hand. As he moved closer, she moved in too. That night, they made love, finally becoming husband and wife for real. The next morning, at breakfast, her dad made chicken soup for Hao Jun to get his strength back. After being gone for 3 days, it was time to head home. Her parents packed a bunch of local goodies for his grandfather. As they were leaving, Hao Jun told Seeley to get in the car, and then told her parents that Seeley had landed her dream job. They were thrilled. Their daughter had a great husband and was doing what she loved. They had no idea how shaky things really were. The kids had missed them like crazy. Hearing them, Hao Jun's grandfather hurried downstairs. While Seeley was out of earshot, he wanted to tell Hao Jun about Shi Chen coming back. But after thinking it over, he decided to let them work it out themselves. The next day at work, Hao Jun saw Shi Chen's spokesperson contract and angrily confronted Qin Tian for not consulting him. Qin Tian argued that Hao Jun had been unreachable and that signing Shi Chen wouldn't hurt the company. Stuck with the situation, Hao Jun agreed. But now that he had Seeley, he needed to keep his distance from Shi Chen. So he delegated all related matters to Hao Jun. That evening, Shi Chen's championship win was announced on TV. Seeley was impressed. Hao Jun's grandfather quickly changed the channel, claiming his show was about to start. Hao Jun, troubled, lost his appetite, retreating to his study to rewatch the news, unsure how to face Seeley. They had finally found happiness together. He couldn't let this jeopardize their relationship. So the next morning, he took Seeley to her favorite breakfast spot. She was surprised. Afterward, holding hands, they walked to his office, so engrossed in each other that they didn't notice anyone else until Hao Jun coughed, causing them both to blush. Seeley quickly excused herself. Hao Jun had come to discuss Shi Chen. They hadn't anticipated that upon returning, Shi Chen would immediately seek out Qing Chen, bringing him gifts. Jen thought she was a kidnapper, but Shi Chen quickly showed him a childhood photo of them together, reminding him that he used to call her Mom. Qing Chen refused, stating he already had a mother. Ji Chen's championship and return were trending online. Seeley felt sorry for the man she had left behind. She was shocked to discover Shi Chen's former fiancé was Hao Jun. They were currently meeting at the company. Hao Jun pulled Seeley away. Even the densest person would understand their history now. Hao Jun tried to explain, but Seeley excused herself, claiming her friend needed her. Seeley desperately needed advice. While Shi Chen hadn't admitted it, Seeley felt she was Xing Chen's biological mother. The more Hao Jun downplayed it, the more concerned she became. Just then, Luo Qi called, wanting to discuss Hao Jun and Shi Chen. Luo Qi despised Shi Chen. Learning about the spokesperson deal, she stormed into Hao Jun's office, asking if he'd forgotten what Shi Chen had done. Hao Jun hadn't, but he had to prioritize the company. Luo Qi reminded him that besides being Mao Lin's CEO, he was also Seeley's husband. Now that his ex was back, Luo Qi was determined to help Seeley. 3 years ago, she detested Shi Chen. Back then, when they were dating, Hao Jun's grandfather disapproved. Hao Jun had worked tirelessly to persuade him. But the night before their wedding, Shi Chen had dumped Hao Jun, leaving to train abroad. Hao Jun confided in Hao Jun that Si Lei knew about his relationship with Shi Chen. They were panicking when the hotel manager called about 3 drunk women. They went to check, finding Luo Qi among them. The 3 were completely wasted, lying and sitting around, creating a scene. The 3 men each took a woman home and then texted Si Lei about it. Si Lei was focused on work, hurrying to her new office, unaware that Shi Chen had scheduled a meeting with Hao Jun. Ji Chen explained that she had gone abroad due to family circumstances and a desire to be worthy of him. She took Hao Jun's hand, but he quickly withdrew it, stating he was married. Undeterred, Shi Chen believed her persistence would win him back. She then went to Hao Jun's grandfather for answers. He attributed it to fate. Si Chen was skeptical. His grandfather explained that marriage wasn't about how long you knew someone. Some people meet hundreds of times without connecting, while others know instantly they've found the one. Matters of the heart were complex. Having run out of patience, he asked the housekeeper to show her out. Seeing a photo of Hao Jun's family, Shi Chen became more determined to win him back. She decided to start with Si Lei, scheduling a meeting to assess her. She intended to intimidate Si Lei, but Si Lei's calm demeanor threw her off. Ji Chen then commissioned Si Lei to design a brooch for her upcoming reality TV show, intending to gift it to herself in the final episode. Si Lei didn't immediately agree, saying she needed to discuss it with Luo Qi. Luo Qi, of course, refused. He knew Shi Chen was manipulative, suspecting ulterior motives behind the brooch order and Si Lei's involvement. Si Lei disagreed, believing the order could benefit Fan Yi. Luo Qi accused her of being crazy, fueling Si Lei's determination. She also wanted to meet the woman Hao Jun had once loved. Hao Jun, worried about how to explain things to Si Lei, knew he couldn't avoid the issue forever. He met Si Lei by the river, telling her not to worry about Shi Chen. Ji Chen was his ex, not Xing Chen's mother. So, who was Xing Chen's mother? Hao Jun finally revealed the truth. Xing Chen was his brother's son. Si Lei also had a secret. Si Xuan was her sister's daughter. Hao Jun had already done a DNA test, confirming Zixuan was a Song. Coincidentally, her sister had died in a car accident, just like his brother. Everything clicked. His sister-in-law was Si Lei's sister, and his brother was responsible for her death. He felt even more guilty towards Si Lei. They decided to tell the children eventually, unaware of the trouble this secrecy would cause. That night, Si Lei told Hao Jun about designing a brooch for Shi Chen. He didn't object, supporting anything she wanted to do. The next day, Si Lei and Luo Qi met with Shi Chen to film a segment for the reality show. Long time no see. Ji Chen immediately brought up her reason for returning, her high school sweetheart, Hao Yun. This made Si Lei even more eager to meet her. She presented Shi Chen with the contract. Ji Chen asked Si Lei's opinion about Hao Jun joining the show. Si Lei replied she would respect his decision, as they were husband and wife. News of their upcoming appearance spread online. Hao Jun called and refused to participate. Si Lei quietly approached him, saying she really wanted to see him on TV. Hao Jun and Shi Chen filmed at a library. Luo Qi, arriving early, called Si Lei, urging her to come supervise. While waiting, Luo Qi sat by the camera. Seeing them close together, she informed the director that Hao Jun was married. The director instructed them to separate. They played off each other perfectly. Initially focused on Shi Chen, the camera now included Si Lei, completely derailing Shi Chen's carefully laid plans. After filming, Si Lei asked Luo Qi to take the kids home, as she had one more scene. Billiards, Shi Chen's specialty. Luo Qi ended up picking up Xing Chen and Zixuan. Zixuan, finding Luo Qi scary, started crying. Luo Qi told her to stop. The poor kids. Zixuan, hungry, devoured almost an entire bowl of noodles, declaring them better than her mom's. Only then did Xing Chen dare to eat. After dinner, with the assistant doing dishes, Xing Chen and Zixuan, no longer afraid of Luo Qi, bounced on the sofa, driving her crazy. Later they celebrated on a rooftop, Hao Jun and Li Xing getting together, and Hao Jun's successful TV appearance. Viewers were focused on Hao Jun and Si Lei. No one cared about Shi Chen. The 4 of them paired off, leaving Luo Qi alone. Not to be outdone, she declared she'd go on a date with He Qing the next day. The following day, Hao Jun got a call from Shi Chen's manager, saying she was unwell. He rushed to see her. The manager explained that Shi Chen suffered from anxiety and had returned to see Hao Jun, only to find he was married. Silei waited for Hao Jun, who didn't return until midnight. He told her Shi Chen was sick, but, afraid of misunderstanding, said he was only helping her find a doctor. Before Silei could process this, Shi Chen's manager called again, and Hao Jun left to take the call. The next morning, he visited Shi Chen again. She wanted to know if, without the marriage, he would still reject her, as she had asked him the previous day. Hao Jun's non-committal answer made her think their feelings were still there, with Silei just in the way. Selfishly, she wanted Silei and Hao Jun to divorce. Ji Chen met with Silei, who was shocked when Shi Chen asked her to divorce Hao Jun. Silei made it clear that when Hao Jun married her, Shi Chen was no longer in his future. Ji Chen didn't believe her, arguing that feelings don't just disappear. Despite her strong words, Silei felt uneasy. She went to Hao Jun's office, seeking reassurance. Hao Jun sensed her distress and asked what was wrong. Silei didn't mention meeting Shi Chen or her request for a divorce, but her sadness was evident. Hao Jun tried to question her, but she stayed silent. To comfort her, he took her hand, promising they would always be together. That evening, they enjoyed the garden swing. He'd neglected Silei lately, dealing with Shi Chen, and now he wanted to make it up to her. Hao Jun called, saying he planned to propose to Li Xin the next day and needed Xing Chen's help. Since kindergarten was closed for the day and Li Xin was working, Hao Jun asked Xing Chen to lure Li Xin to the playground. Hao Jun had everything prepared. Initially it went smoothly. Li Xin loved the surprise. But when Hao Jun knelt and presented the ring, it triggered a painful memory. On the day they were supposed to register their marriage, her ex had disappeared. Unable to let go of the past, she rejected Hao Jun's proposal. Hao Jun, heartbroken, devoured bread, believing sweets could lift one's spirits. Seeing his misery, Hao Jun consoled him. Silei comforted Li Xin, advising her not to let past hurts damage present relationships. The two couples, trying to mend broken hearts, were unaware their own relationship was about to unravel. Chen Tian learned from director Chen that Hao Jun had been visiting Shi Chen daily. He deliberately ran into Silei at the mall, casually mentioning Hao Jun's frequent visits to Shi Chen. Initially trusting Hao Jun, Silei now had doubts. Chen Tian had achieved his goal. Returning home, Silei saw Hao Jun about to leave and asked if he was going to see Shi Chen, wanting to go with him. Hao Jun said it wasn't convenient, promising to explain later, and hurried off. This further fueled Silei's suspicions. Luo Qi and Li Xin quickly noticed her distress. Silei confided in them, learning from Luo Qi that Shi Chen was staying at her and Hao Jun's old house. This was the last straw. Silei insisted on going there. As soon as they arrived, they saw Hao Jun and Shi Chen together. Silei felt her heart shatter. She watched them from afar. Hao Jun looked up and saw her, surprised by her presence. He approached, trying to explain that things weren't as they seemed. Silei questioned why he visited Shi Chen every day if she was only sick. Hao Jun hesitated, unable to reveal the nature of Shi Chen's illness, deepening the misunderstanding. Distraught, Silei wanted to be alone. Lost in thought, she walked aimlessly, receiving a call from Chen Tian. He took her to the gym to vent, then showed her a short video clip of her sister, Si Diane. It turned out he had known and liked Si Diane. Silei immediately asked about her sister's life abroad. After her sister's death, she'd only received the accident report and death certificate. Chen Tian revealed Si Diane had never married. The man's family hadn't accepted her, and even though she was pregnant, the man refused to marry her. As Silei reeled from this revelation, Hao Jun called, asking for her location to pick her up. Checking the address, he was surprised to see it was a hotel and immediately drove there. He saw Silei and Chen Tian leaving the hotel, talking and oblivious to his presence. He confronted them, demanding to know what they were doing there. Silei said she was there to unwind, suggesting he check for himself if he didn't believe her. This was all part of Chen Tian's plan to drive a wedge between them. Silei, filled with regret, felt she should have trusted Hao Yun. She texted him, asking to meet in the garden. After her explanation, Hao Jun was relieved. He told Silei about Shi Chen's illness in detail and confessed his feelings for her. The misunderstanding was finally cleared up. They were back on track. But back in his study, he got a call. Shi Chen had agreed to film the next day and wanted to talk to him privately beforehand. She was still trying to win him back, convinced he still loved her. Li and her friends also showed up, bringing the brooch for Shi Chen. They learned from the director that Hao Jun and Shi Chen were talking upstairs. Li went up alone. She saw them together but didn't interrupt, watching from the doorway. She realized Hao Jun was saying goodbye to Shi Chen, and left, reassured. After filming, Li gave Shi Chen the brooch. Shi Chen was thrilled, learning its name. Gingham flower symbolized a bright future, representing Li's well wishes. This finally gave Shi Chen closure. She decided to seek treatment abroad. Before leaving, she said goodbye to Hao Jun and Li, having become good friends with Li. With Shi Chen gone, nothing stood between Hao Jun and Li. Hao Jun decided to throw a real wedding, feeling guilty about their rushed ceremony. He wanted to give her a proper celebration. He'd already chosen some wedding dresses, asking her to pick one she liked. Li felt incredibly happy. She had found her soulmate. Meanwhile, Chen Tian contacted lawyer Wang, Mao Lin's legal counsel, wanting information. Lawyer Wang, afraid of revealing Hao Jun's real reason for marrying Li, excused himself, claiming he had a meeting. Chen Tian, noticing his reaction, felt his suspicions were correct. It was time to make his move. Hao Jun also wanted to tell Li the truth before the wedding. He brought her lunch, struggling to confess. Just as he started, his assistant called with news of a major problem at the company. Since his first day at Mao Lin, Chen Tian had been secretly buying shares. Now, he was the majority shareholder and was moving to oust Hao Jun. Chen Tian was in control. Before Hao Jun could figure things out, the housekeeper called. His grandfather had collapsed and was in the hospital. The doctor explained he'd had a stressful episode and needed surgery, but his age made it risky. Conservative treatment was the safer option. While waiting, Li received a text from Chen Tian. "Want to know why your grandfather collapsed? Meet me on the roof." Li slapped him, shocked by his cruelty. Chen Tian claimed he did it for Diane and her children. His earlier visit had triggered the grandfather's relapse. He then dropped a bombshell. Zixuan and Xing Chen were twins. The Song family had threatened her sister, forcing her to give up the man she loved or never see her children again. That's why she brought Zixuan back to China, all orchestrated by Hao Jun's grandfather. Hao Jun had only married Li to gain custody of Zixuan. Everything flooded back, Hao Jun asking where Zixuan was born, his admission that their loveless marriage was a sham. Despite everything, Li still struggled to believe Hao Jun's feelings were fake. Until Chen Tian revealed his trump card, the custody lawyer's contract. Now she knew it was all a lie. She confronted Hao Jun, throwing the contract on his desk. Realizing their marriage was a sham, Li finally understood. Hao Jun tried to explain, admitting his initial intentions, but insisting he wouldn't take Zixuan from her now. Furious, Li wouldn't listen. She wanted a divorce. With his grandfather in a coma, Li demanding a divorce, and Qing Tian taking over his company, Hao Jun was reeling. He didn't know how he'd face his grandfather. Li prepared the divorce papers, removed their rings, ready to leave with Zixuan. While packing, Xing Chen arrived. He'd learned he was her nephew, and now, looking at him, she saw her sister even more. Xing Chen, thinking Li was abandoning him, was heartbroken. Li told him she was taking Zixuan to visit her grandparents. Xing Chen wanted to go too, but Li said Hao Jun would be sad without him. Xing Chen agreed to stay. Returning from the hospital, Hao Jun peeked into Zixuan's room, finding Li and the children asleep. He couldn't resist going in. Seeing her packed bags, he couldn't bear the thought of her leaving. As he covered her with a blanket, she woke up. They went to the garden. Before leaving, Li wanted to make things clear about the divorce. She'd left the papers in his study. Hao Jun asked her to wait until his grandfather woke up, but Li wanted to leave immediately with Zixuan. Hao Jun begged for another chance, promising to make it up to her. But Li was resolute. Hao Jun didn't push further, but he refused to sign the divorce papers. Xing Chen overheard their conversation in the garden and ran back to his room, sobbing. Li found him crying and asked if he'd had a bad dream. She told him dreams weren't real, and he'd be okay when he woke up. He wished it were just a dream, that their family of 4 could go back to how things were. But they couldn't. Li left with Zixuan. Zixuan wanted her dad and brother to come too. Li said dad had important work, and Xing Chen needed to stay with him. Before they even left, Zixuan asked when they'd be back. Li didn't know how to answer. Upstairs, Xing Chen tugged at Hao Jun's hand, telling him to stop Sile. Seeing his father hesitate, he let go and ran after his mom. Sile looked back and saw Xing Chen chasing the car, but she didn't tell the driver to stop. She couldn't give in. Xing Chen chased after them, crying. Zi Xuan cried too, begging her mother to let Xing Chen come with them. Sile didn't stop, both mother and daughter sobbing in the car. Sile took Siwan to her parents' house. Seeing them without Hao Jun and Xing Chen, her parents knew something was wrong. That night, her mother asked what had happened, but Sile, not wanting her to worry, simply said she was homesick. Since Sile left, Xing Chen had locked himself in his room, refusing to eat or drink. Hao Jun was heartbroken. He missed Sile and Zi Chuan just as much as Xing Chen did. Even in his sleep, Xing Chen called out for his mom. That night, he snuck out and called Zi Xuan on his smartwatch. They whispered to each other. Xing Chen decided to find his mom himself. Early the next morning, Xing Chen said goodbye to his father and left. Waking up to find Xing Chen gone, Hao Jun searched frantically, finally learning from building security that his secretary had taken Xing Chen. Sile, discovering Zi Xuan missing, skipped breakfast as they searched for her. Hao Jun called. He was on his way too. Sile, still angry, sat in the back of the car, not next to him. After running away, Xing Chen and Zi Xuan finally found each other. Lost and unsure where to go, they sat down to wait for their parents. Zi Xuan was thirsty. Being the older brother, Xing Chen went to find her something to drink. He returned with a watermelon, smashing it on the ground, shocking Zi Xuan. They devoured the watermelon, quenching their thirst. Hao Jun and Sile, tracking Xing Chen's watch, could no longer pinpoint their location. They had to search house by house. They were frantic. It was getting dark, and they were running out of time. The kids, tired of waiting, decided to ask a police officer for help. As they were about to leave, they heard their names called. Just before dark, they were found. Sile hugged Xing Chen tightly, and Hao Jun hugged Zi Xuan, checking for injuries. Xing Chen had found his mom. The family of four embraced. The four returned to Sile's parents' house. Facing his in-laws' reproaches, Hao Jun could only apologize. Her father assumed he'd made a typical man's mistake. After some explaining, he was relieved it wasn't a moral issue, making it easier to resolve. That night, Hao Jun went to see Sile, who was still angry and ignoring him. He told her about his brother. Since going abroad, their relationship had been strained. They hadn't reconciled before his brother's death, and neither he nor his grandfather knew anything about his brother's life overseas. This didn't sit right with Sile. Qin Tian had told her that Hao Jun's grandfather had opposed their relationship. Their stories clashed, so Sile asked her parents, but they were reluctant to discuss the past. Sile then revealed that her sister had given birth to twins. This startled her parents. Things were more complicated than they'd thought. They finally shared the story. Sile's sister was adopted. After their marriage, struggling with infertility, they'd adopted her. Shortly after, Sile's mother became pregnant. Then, her father was injured in the forest, making it impossible to support both children. They'd returned her sister to the orphanage, changing her personality and leading her to a relationship with an outsider. Sile showed them Qin Tian's picture. Her mother recognized him as the same young man. Sile recalled their first meeting, Qin Tian mentioning the orphanage. He'd likely known her sister from there. Determined to uncover the truth, she returned to the songhouse. Xing Chen and Zi Xuan were overjoyed, but Sile's heart was heavy. She visited Hao Jun's grandfather in the hospital. Seeing him lying there softened her heart. She found Qin Tian, asking him to stop, but he was consumed by vengeance, determined to make the songs pay. Before leaving, Sile pleaded with him again, saying her sister wouldn't forgive him. Sile's plea only fueled Qin Tian's desire for revenge. At the shareholder meeting, he was determined to oust Hao Jun. During Hao Jun's absence, he'd colluded with Director Xi, acquiring a significant stake in Maolin, making him confident of victory. At the meeting, over half the shareholders voted against Hao Jun. As he stood to leave, Luo Qi and Sile arrived. Luo Qi's Fan Yi jewelry now owned 8% of Maolin, giving her veto power. She reminded the shareholders that Maolin's success was due to decades of effort by Hao Jun's grandfather and Hao Jun. A sudden change in leadership would be detrimental, urging them not to be manipulated. This turned the tide. Hao Jun was reinstated as CEO, but on a 6-month probation. Learning Si Lei was responsible, he was deeply grateful, softening her heart slightly. Just then the hospital called. His grandfather was awake. They rushed to see him. Si Lei took the opportunity to ask about her sister. Hao Jun's grandfather had only recently learned that Xing Chen and Zi Xuan were twins. He told her that after going abroad, his brother had never contacted them, not even before his death. This contradicted Chen Tian's story. Unsure who to believe, and with her morning sickness worsening, Si Lei needed answers. She was about to meet Chen Tian when Hao Jun returned from the hospital. He guessed she was going out. As she stood, Si Lei was suddenly sick. She didn't tell him about the pregnancy, just that her stomach was upset. Hao Jun wanted to take her to the hospital, but she refused. Meeting Chen Tian, Si Lei confronted him. "Grandfather isn't like that. What's your real motive?" He wanted revenge on the songs. Revenge for what? He showed her a photo of Hao Jun and her sister. Si Lei was stunned. Hao Jun and his brother were identical twins. Chen Tian had worked to put himself through college, while her sister had fallen in love with Hao Jun's brother, gotten pregnant, and wanted to start a family, only to be rejected. Si Dian had even asked Chen Tian to be the children's father. He then played a recording of Si Lei's sister and Hao Jun's brother. Si Lei couldn't deny it, especially now that she was pregnant herself. She was lost. Si Lei confronted Hao Jun's grandfather, who revealed the recording was only a small part of the story. Her sister had been the one at fault. Overwhelmed, Si Lei fainted and was rushed to the hospital. She woke up to the news of her pregnancy. She apologized to Hao Jun's grandfather for her suspicions. Just when it seemed like things were resolved, Si Lei received devastating news. Xing Chen and Zi Xuan had been kidnapped by Chen Tian, who intended to take them to their biological mother. He almost went through with it, but couldn't bring himself to do it. Si Lei told him the whole truth about Si Dian. Chen Tian was devastated. Hao Jun and Si Lei quickly left with their children. All misunderstandings were finally cleared up. This concludes our video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to not miss out on more amazing videos. Thank you for watching.